It is better than Rogue One, which I maintain is an abortion, and anyone who defends it ought to do so with a measure of shame.
Then the critiques, I mean, I want to do a rage against Rogue One, not a praise, I'm afraid, for people who thought I was going to do a praise on Rogue One. The film's got plenty of plot issues I can go over and character ones, so I imagine I'll be making a rage.
Oh boy, I guess I'm going to be that guy to defend Rogue One. I don't mind if ER thinks I'm retarded, or anybody else for that matter, but I'd like to shine a light on some of the reasons why I actually like this film. In fact, not only is Rogue One the best Star Wars film outside of the original trilogy, in my head, it's the only Star Wars movie outside of the original trilogy that's actually canon. And this is my little video of explaining why. I'm going to start my way from the outside of this film and then work my way to the core of it, since I do agree with some of the criticism against it. Mainly the main characters. I do agree that there are some major flaws with them, but even with those flaws, this film is still really good. So are you ready for this show? Here we go. The setting. Alright, so I would like to make the argument that the setting in Star Wars is a sort of character in the movies. The initial draw that pulled so many people into the theaters and broke box office records in 1977 was a dazzling sci-fi world full of special effects, spaceships, and locations that nobody had ever seen before, and in a flavor that was still distinctly in the late 1970s. Even though movies seem faster paced nowadays, back then the original movies seemed more organic. Crowds were chaotic, there was more of a grit and reality to the settings. The locations seemed to make logical sense, and there were more to them than just the basics to tell a narrative. George Lucas was also promoting a used future where it acknowledges that even futuristic devices get old and rusty. Almost nothing in the movies were brand new. The ships and devices and robots broke down due to wear and tear, they malfunctioned, and they needed to be fixed. And in this respect, Rogue One shined above every other Star Wars filmed after the original trilogy. The places felt realistic, fleshed out, and they mattered. The robots and devices and ships had a weathered feel to them. Everything seemed to have a logical reason to exist in the universe. Alright, so let's take a look at a place in Rogue One. So even though Jedha was basically on another desert planet, Gareth Edwards and company put a lot of effort into fleshing this city out, in both look and mythos, and it elevated it to much more than just Tatooine 2.0. I mean, you couldn't mistake it for Tatooine if you even tried. And we were here among its residents and on its streets for a good portion of the movie too. We got a story about why this place existed.
Their holy city, the last reminder of the Jedi.
And we saw motifs of the cultural presence there and the real people on the ground doing their day-to-day. You could sympathize with the people who lived there too, because it quickly became obvious, without explicitly telling you, that they were making the best of things and trying to live out normal lives while caught between the oppression of the Empire and the threat of a terrorist organization. Ironically, even though it was technically on a scale much less than the destruction of Alderaan in A New Hope, and even more so than the destruction of the Hosnian system in The Force Awakens, Jedha's destruction ended up having much more impact to me than the other two events. And that's because we were in its streets. We knew what this place was all about and their struggles. Even Saul Guerrera's hideout seemed like a real place in the Jedha scenes. There were logical reasons for the characters to exist in the base, and you could figure out these reasons without the film explicitly telling you this. Like these guys in the back, right? Beforehand you learned why Kyber crystals were important, and why the Empire wanted them.
Kyber crystal. All they can get. We wondered why they were stripping the temple. Now we know. It's the fuel for the weapon.
You also learned how Saul Guerrera was involved in all of this.
What's with the destroyer?
It's because of your old friend, Saul Guerrera. He's been attacking the cargo shipments.
And then you witnessed a sort of terrorist heist that Guerrera's men had done just prior to being led through this hideout. These guys in the back are tasked with examining the crystals from that raid. What they do with them afterwards is a mystery. Maybe Guerrera's men ends up selling those crystals to fund his operation. Or maybe he forwards them to someone he trusts with the importance of them. We don't know that, but these people right here have a logical reason to exist. And these guys right here are a little easier. See, this is Guerrera's armory, and this guy right here is the armorer, and the little guy right here is turning in his weapon. Probably spent some time cleaning it before he turned it in. Behind the armorer are the racks of weapons in the armory. It makes logical sense, and it's a sci-fi version of a real place. And I know this because I was in the army, and the function of this place is obvious to me. Even the random guys here lend a realism to Guerrera's base. See, when you're not in the action, you're on downtime, and you pass the time with what you have. Say maybe sitting around a table and playing a game of dice or spades, or watching videos to entertain you like this guy. The point is that the effort was put into the details of this place to make it feel real and logically plausible. None of the prequels came even close to achieving this. Our view of the Star Wars universe in that time period was at the bureaucratic level, so we didn't get to spend time in the trenches with all of the plebs in these locations. And key things were missing, like the low-level workers beyond the people needed to execute a bare-bones plot. We didn't get a story for Geonosis or Mustafar or Naboo, really. I mean, all we knew about Naboo, basically, was that it was the planet that kicked off the Republic's transition from a democracy to an empire. And we didn't see any of Naboo's people beyond the upper bureaucracy and the pilots that were conveniently on hand. So the sequel trilogy has so far failed as well in this respect. Let's take a look at Jakku in comparison to Jedha. Even though the purpose of Tent City on Jakku was obvious, like it was some sort of hub to harvest and sell used parts from starships, there really wasn't enough of a story behind it to make it a believable place. There didn't seem to be a sense of community, and there was nothing really set up beyond the absolute minimum needed to convey the plot. I mean, are there places these people go after they clean and sell their parts? Are there groups and cliques that form for comfort and security? Maybe landing pads where ships come and go to buy parts and sell goods from beyond the city limits. Do they watch movies or play soccer when they aren't working? Maybe a game of hacky sack? Beyond that, if you think about it, the town's location actually makes no logical sense. I mean, if your business is supposedly extracting and selling parts from downed Star Destroyers, wouldn't it make sense to set up your town closer to those ships? Maybe even inside them, where not only you have the best access to those parts, but then you'd also have the added protection from the unforgiving heat and possible raiders that might try to steal the goods and the money generated by your industry. And you can't argue that it would take too much effort to move the town, because the town is just a bunch of tents haphazardly set up. Really, the only reason this town exists is because of the Star Destroyers. So why don't you just set up inside them? Ancillary characters. Rogue One is also the only film among the prequels and the sequels to get the feel of the factions right as well. The Empire, in the original trilogy, was a well-oiled machine, and it employed many people in different jobs to keep its military forces in order. And the people who made the original trilogy cast the right people to convey the jobs within the Empire. You had operators communicate and direct space traffic, for instance. Technicians worked the highly advanced sensor equipment to scan the Millennium Falcon. And prison wardens being annoyed that they weren't being told a big hair thing was being transferred to their cell block. Rogue One stays true to this vision. You see the officers running the Star Destroyers and the bases, and space traffic control granting access through the shield gate, and the ground workers guided the spaceships into the landing pads and formed inspection teams. Rogue One cast the correct people to fill these roles too. You actually believe that the officers are officers because they are the correct age and they have the right demeanor. Compare that to this guy, right? You can't possibly have looked at this kid for the first time in your life and guessed that he was a general. He's just a kid. A captain at most, but I would have placed him as a lieutenant. I mean, even Captain Viet must have been near his 40s when he was promoted to Admiral by Vader. This is just a small point, but isn't the rank of general meant for ground forces? Why did the First Order put a general in charge of the Space Navy? Did they run out of admirals? This may be a shallow point, but none of the characters in Rogue One are pretty. And that makes this movie much more believable. Like all of Poe's X-Wing pilots and the officers from First Order Star Destroyers look like they came out of JCPenney's catalogs. Except for this guy. Why wasn't this guy in charge instead of General Hux? But none of the pilots in Red Wing looked pretty. They were just regular guys and they didn't put on any makeup before they donned their helmets to fight the Death Star. The officers of the Imperial Navy were basically old guys and they probably drank too much coffee. Rogue One was the only movie beyond the original trilogy that got this. Nobody was pretty in this movie except for maybe Jyn Erso, and even then, she didn't look like she caked on the makeup before invading Imperial installations. Even at the end, she looked just as beat up as the rest of her Rogue One buddies too. But then you have all the other people. None of the extra characters in Rogue One looked like they had modeling gigs on the side. I mean, this guy wasn't pretty. That guy wasn't pretty. This pilot wasn't pretty. The commander wasn't pretty. The general of Blue Wing wasn't pretty. I mean, he was a general with a giant mustache. And he was freaking awesome because he wasn't pretty. Even this guy, who basically had 2 seconds on screen and drew at the short straw smacking into the shield gates.
Oh, come on, come on, come on! Hold on!
He's not anywhere near pretty. And for that reason, he comes off as more awesome and draws a lot more sympathy from me than all the screen time Poe, Finn, and Rey could muster even combined. And that's because he was more believable as a real person doing his job as an X-Wing pilot. My favorite of all the side characters in Rogue One was the Two Tubes character. In my mind, if you ignore the dumb Solo movie, Two Tubes is the new Boba Fett. He's the ground commander of Saul Guerrera's paramilitary organization. He's not pretty, and the way he was portrayed grounded him into a reality that no character in the prequels or the sequels ever achieved. The movie doesn't explicitly tell you anything about this character, but you can see what he's all about through his actions. He's tough, he's suspicious about people not in his organization, and he's deeply vindictive of people who harm the people under his command. He prioritizes his soldiers above himself. You don't need to know any of his backstory, just like you didn't really need to know any information about Boba Fett and where that character came from. Nobody even said Boba Fett's name except for once in Empire or Return of the Jedi, and it's arguable that Boba Fett even needed to be in Jedi. The less you knew about this character, the better, and that's because his awesomeness was based on his actions and his ability to stand up to Vader. And that's all you really needed to know about Boba Fett to understand that he was badass. And the same goes for Two Tubes. We didn't need to have any information stated to us through dialogue to understand that he was an awesome character. We just needed to observe him do his thing and we knew. The vehicles. Yeah, all the new vehicles in the sequel trilogy are basically worthless. Everyone already explained why the bombers in The Last Jedi were useless pieces of trash. But then all the other ships seem to be grade F adaptations to the B-Wing design for some reason. Did they really stuff General Leia into the fat B-Wing just so she could set foot on ground and meet Han Solo again? Kylo Ren could have just killed her then because that thing looks just about as capable as the bombers. No one really talks about the China grade knockoff B-Wings on Crete, probably because they were upstaged by Tico, but these things were even less useful than the bombers. At least the bombers could fly. Why did these things need to be connected to the ground to work properly? But Rogue One brings us the U-Wing, and I love it. People may think that it's kind of ugly, but really that's the charm to it. It's not pretty at all, but when you dive into the nuts and bolts, and the details that the movie people put into this craft, everything about it makes sense, including what function it serves and how people operate it. The U-Wing is essentially a Space Huey helicopter, or a Black Hawk. And like locations like Jeddah, its job and the way it functions makes actual logical sense. It fills a role that we haven't seen before, and it does it rather well. Even better, we get to spend time inside the ship, and we get to see how it functions. Beyond the pilot and co-pilot seats, we see the communications station, for instance. This is where Cassian receives orders from his command deep within Imperial territory. And when we first see K2SO, we see him working on the station while talking to Jyn Erso. The movie doesn't tell you this, but it's highly believable that he could be doing some sort of preventative maintenance or loading some sort of encryption scheme into the station in preparation for their mission ahead. The movie doesn't explicitly state that, but if you've served in the military and operated a radio with encryption in it, then this is exactly what your mind goes to when you see K2SO doing this. Even the seats on the U-Wing add a realistic nature to this ship. They are very minimal and not designed for comfort at all, much like the seats you would find on a real military helicopter. And even the sounds inside the U-Wing paint the picture of an interior designed around a battle-hardened material.
I'm K2SO.
It's a very distinct sound that you will hear in lots of different military planes and tanks. The Imperial cargo shuttle is equally as believable and awesome to me. Similar to the U-Wing reminding me of a Huey helicopter, the cargo shuttle screams C-130 airplane to me. The way the cockpit works, all of the tubes and the wires and the box devices in the cargo section, the rusty pieces of equipment stored within, and even the guys laying down on the ramp. This is definitely the Imperial version of the C-130. And again, the logical functionality of the craft ground it into a certain kind of reality that makes Rogue One so much more believable than its counterparts. Even the prisoner crawler had an air of realness to it, actually. Do you see this guy right here? That was me in the army. A guy hanging out in the back of a Humvee, bored as hell waiting to get to the next destination. Side characters. One of the major problems with the prequels is that they fleshed out the wrong supporting characters from the original trilogy. Nobody really needed the backstory to Boba Fett, and nobody really needed a link between Yoda and Chewbacca in a shoehorned blip of a reference. What the prequels should have done was put more of an effort to explain the relationship between Owen Skywalker and Obi-Wan. You could tell in A New Hope that there was a long-standing beef between the two of them.
What if he's related to Ben?
That wizard's just a crazy old man.
That's what your uncle told you. He didn't hold with your father's ideals, thought he should have stayed here and not gotten involved.
That would have been much better than providing a worthless cameo of Jabba the Hutt. Or, you know, we could have fleshed out somebody from the Empire. Someone who seemed to have higher rank than even Darth Vader.
Enough of this. Vader, release him.
As you wish.
And who commanded the most destructive weapon in the Imperial Navy. Someone who obviously had decades of experience and service in the Empire and was well respected by all within the ranks. Could you imagine a story about his rise to power in relation to Anakin and how he gained favor with Palpatine during his transition from Chancellor to Emperor? But since we didn't get that, we can now see more of Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One. And while we didn't get a sort of origin story for him, we do get to see him fleshed out more and his relationship with his officers.
When has become now, Director Krennic. The Emperor will tolerate no further delay.
And we see his political jockeying.
I will tell him that I will be taking control over the weapon I first spoke of years ago, effective immediately.
And his positioning between him and Krennic.
The Emperor is awaiting my report.
One had hoped that he and Lord Vader might have been here for such an occasion.
And I thought it prudent to save you from any potential embarrassment.
His impatience for failure and dissent, and even his logical restraint but cruel ruthlessness.
I stand ready to destroy the entire moon. That won't be necessary. We need a statement, not a manifesto. The Holy City will be enough for today.
Even Vader here gets more of a reinforcement of his views from A New Hope. You may think that his disdain for the Death Star in Rogue One was out of character.
Its power to create problems has certainly been confirmed.
But really, he wasn't a fan of the Death Star to begin with.
Don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed. The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force.
And we also reinforce the Empire's military's relationship with the Imperial Senate, and the fear that the Imperial Army expressed towards them during the first part of A New Hope.
Holding her is dangerous. Word of this gets out, it could generate sympathy for the rebellion in the Senate.
We see this relationship through the eyes of the military officers rather than the boring Senate meetings. It's entirely consistent with what was going on in A New Hope, and it helps to establish Rogue One more as canon to the original trilogy than any other Star Wars films after. Characters. Right, so now we get to the meat of what people probably object to when talking about Rogue One. The characters. And I get where people are coming from. Specifically, I do agree with the assessment that Jyn Erso functions essentially as dead weight, unwilling to help anyone or anything until she gets the message from her father, and then witnesses the destruction of Jedha. ER basically defines a serviceable main character as someone with a clear-cut goal and a desire to achieve that goal, and this is something I also agree with. It's also somewhat jarring that Jyn Erso would try to help the rebellion even after they essentially got her father killed, although at this point maybe she had some time to logically conclude that destroying the Death Star was more important, or deduce that it was a rogue intelligence wing of the rebellion that messed up here. They could have explained this a little better, I guess. So, by ER's definition, Jyn Erso doesn't really make the grade as a good main character, and it's something that I can kind of agree with. I wonder, though, if I'm viewing this movie through the eyes of Cassian Andor instead. Like, Disney tells you that Jyn Erso is the main character, and even the movie itself desperately tries to convey to you that she is the main character.
We have the plans. She did it.
Even though this was obviously a team effort. Even you did your part in this, Admiral Raddus. Give yourself some credit here, man. But if you want to check all the boxes in ER's definition, then Cassian Andor doesn't do a bad job of fitting the main character role. He has a clear-cut goal. He wants to get as much information as he can regarding this new super weapon that he's heard about before the Empire does something bad. He has a conflict between his duty to Jyn Erso and K2SO and following the orders of his command, which require him to betray Jyn. Cassian Andor definitely takes action too. Whether it's killing his informant to prevent sensitive information falling into Imperial hands, commanding his insurgent group to get into Scarif and retrieve the plans, even taking the correct actions to save the people under him under the most dire conditions. And at the end, he's the one who saved Jyn from Krennic, when basically Krennic called Jyn's bluff and was ready to nullify everyone's effort on Scarif by killing her before she could send the message.
You, on the other hand, die with the rebellion.
Cassian even goes through somewhat of an arc. At the start, he followed his orders without question, and at the end, he rebelled against the rebellion, forming his own team, taking things into his own hands when he saw that his organization was going to abandon the cause that he fought all his life for. So, if you basically take the perspective that Disney wants you to take, then I can understand, yes, the movie lacks a good main character. But maybe if you look at the movie through the eyes of Cassian as the main character instead, it might fare better for you. The other main characters are pretty good, I think. I mean, Jyn Erso isn't so bad as a supporting character, and her motivations make much more sense than Rey. Jyn isn't a Mary Sue like Rey, and her fighting abilities are explained adequately. Like, unlike Rey, who spent most of her time just farming for parts, Jyn was actually a part of Saw Gerrera's army, and it's totally logical that she would have learned how to fight under him during her formative years. The conflict between her and K2SO was actually pretty funny at times.
The weapon your father's building.
Maybe we should leave target practice behind.
Are you talking about me?
And it was satisfying to see them reach a sort of respect for each other at the end of the movie.
You'll need this. You wanted one, right?
The Ruddy Brooke character was pretty good as the shy guy who wanted to do the right thing and actually was a competent Imperial shuttle pilot. His knowledge of Imperial workings was actually a lot more credible than Finn the janitor. That's because you got to see him do his actual job in the movie, working the shuttle that he probably piloted throughout his career. And then you get Trute and Base, and people like to complain that these characters didn't get fleshed out enough. And I can see that. But you do get a lot of background information on them while in Jeddah when we hear the story of the city.
Kyber crystal. All they can get.
The temple's been destroyed, but she'll be there waiting.
Their holy city, the last reminder of the Jedi.
Remember, Jeddah is important to the Jedi and the Force. And after Jin meets Chirrut for the first time, Cassian explains a little bit about who they are.
Who are they?
The guardians of the Wills. Protectors of the Kyber temple.
So you get at least the story that these guys were a part of the Guardian of the Wills, and they were tasked with defending the Temple of Jeddah. But now the Empire has taken over and kicked them out, and now the Guardians are basically wandering the streets of the city, trying to make a living and deal with the loss of their organization's purpose. Sure, the movie doesn't directly state this to you, but you don't really need to learn more about their backstory to realistically believe that Chirrut and Baze had known each other for years, even decades. Coupled with that, when both of them turn up after Guerrera's men attacked the Empire, this is entirely believable, not just through expository dialogue, but also through their interactions with each other. You can even sense the dissonance between the two of them, with Baze being the disenchanted guy who doesn't believe in the cause anymore,
Just praying for the door to open.
and Chirrut keeping the faith and hoping to talk his brother in arms back into the light.
Baze Malbus was once the most devoted guardian of us all.
At the very least, Rogue One paints this duo in a very believable light, and their ending moments provide a believable payoff to Baze's loss of faith.
Force is with me.
You know, I actually like Krennic as the antagonist. He's a different sort of evil from what we normally see in the Star Wars universe.
Are we blind? Deploy the garrison! Move!
He's not bent on galactic domination like the Emperor, and he's certainly not the evil SS guy like Vader. He's a man within the Imperial system that has drive and ambition to make it through the ranks and gain recognition and fame within the Empire, even though he recognizes that Imperial tactics aren't especially ethical.
You're confusing peace with terror. Well, you have to start somewhere.
He's not especially afraid of getting his hands dirty when he needs to either. Details matter. Saul Guerrera has things to help him breathe and robot legs, but there's a different system in place here than Vader. It's very believable in the Star Wars universe though. It's kind of like a poor man's version of cybernetics. This guy has a scout trooper's mask, kind of like Boba Fett's uniform was cobbled together originally from Mandalorian armor. I definitely like the headphones on the C-130 and the Huey. People in loud airplanes don't actually talk to each other, just screaming at the microphone on their dashboards. They made the Darth Vader suit look like the Darth Vader suit as it was in A New Hope, not the other movies. Guerrera's Blackwing starfighters seemed pretty cool to me. Speaking of which, the details put into War-Torn Jeddah was absolutely breathtaking. The decorations, the war damage, the reactions people had to the Star Destroyer and the robots. The city was breathtaking. The Death Star eclipse was awesome, and the subsequent destruction of Jeddah was actually really pretty.
Oh, it's beautiful.
You seen that new BT-16? Hey, did you hear the rumors? Yeah, the T-15s have been marked obsolete. Oh boy, it's about time for that.
The guys blocked their face when Death Star fired its giant laser. Blockade Runner of Rogue One looks exactly like Blockade Runner from A New Hope, from the outside in. Fire ion torpedoes!
Ion torpedoes away! Stand by, ion control.
And then these guys showed up. This was actually quite a thing to see in the theaters. When Red Wing Commander and Gold Wing Commander checked in, the entire theater I was seeing the movie in erupted into joyous celebration. And it was here that what little doubt I had left with Rogue One melted away, and I accepted it as canon to the Star Wars universe. And I acknowledged that I like this movie so much better than The Force Awakens. Was this fan service? Probably. But it's believable fan service. And it makes perfect sense that these two individual pilots were involved in this battle before they flew the Yavin mission. I didn't mind at all that they were in this movie. In fact, I celebrated it. Details like this completed the movie for me, and I know that details were put into this movie that made it so much better for fans of the other series as well, like the Clone Wars and the Rebels cartoons. The fan service in this movie wasn't overt or in your face or had any crucial role within the plot, but the details were there enough that people would notice if they knew what to look for. The final battle. Yes, I'm saying it. Rogue One had the best ending battle of the entire Star Wars franchise. This isn't just a numbers game either, because you get the feeling that Gareth Edwards kept the numbers of the Imperials and the Rebels down, in part to keep from outshining the Battle of Endor, but Rogue One managed to outshine Return of the Jedi in this aspect anyway. And I'm not saying that the Battle of Endor was bad, I actually really liked it. And in fact, I'd like to include the Battle of Endor along with the Battle of Yavin and the Battle of Scarif to try to explain why these three battles are better than anything the prequels and the sequels had in terms of an action sequence. Where did these three battles succeed to say where the starting Battle of Coruscant in the Revenge of Sith failed? Well, there are a number of factors that differentiate the first three from the latter. Off the top of my head, the tone of the battles were consistent. The stakes were clear in all of them, and things made logical sense in terms of their goals and tactics. One of the major things that these three battles did right is that they included a competent military leader for each one. The leader of each battle served not just as the guy in charge of all of the other people on the protagonist side, but also they served as a sort of narrator to the audience, communicating the goals, stages, and strategies being executed in the battle. Sort of like quest givers in MMOs, only much less boring. Having this bit of information conveyed by the leader of the battle helps the audience to follow the events of the chaotic scenes in front of them. So the leader of the Battle of Yavin, of course, was the Red Leader. In Endor, it was Lando Calrissian. And with the Battle of Scarif, the commander was Admiral Raddus. You may be scratching your head, wondering why I didn't choose Admiral Akbar for the Battle of Endor, and the answer is quite simple. Admiral Akbar wasn't really in charge of the Battle of Endor. I mean, if you think about it, if you really think about it, the Rebel command structure was borked before the Battle of Endor even started when they promoted Lando to General. Lando, who had been in the Rebel Alliance for all of about a day after spending most of the time between Empire and Jedi, is some random guard in Jabba's palace. Even so, you'd think that Akbar was the ultimate guy in charge because he commanded Home One, the flagship of the battle. But Lando didn't really respect him enough to follow the most basic of his orders.
All craft, prepare to jump into hyperspace on my mark.
Psh, whatever, Akbar. Try to keep up, okay? Then the entire battle is just Lando barking orders to Akbar, when basically Akbar is ready to turn his tail and run when things go horrifically wrong for the Alliance.
On one, this is Go, Leader.
It's all right. All craft prepare to retreat.
You won't get another chance at this, Admiral.
We have no choice, General Calrissian. Our cruisers can't repel firepower of that magnitude.
And we'll have that shield down. We've got to give him more time.
Akbar may have come up with that awesome meme, but really, even that meme is just the sudden realization of the tactical shortcomings from the rebellion when they planned this attack. Admiral Raddus, however, was absolutely the leader of his forces in the Battle of Scarif. The second the rebel fleet pulled out of hyperspace, he took charge. He decided the tactics and gave out his orders, and the people under him executed those orders. And when things got tough, he doubled down.
Deflector shields down to 50%. We're sustaining heavy damage.
There's no turning back now. We have to press the attack.
And he figured out a major part of the solution to the problem of getting the Death Star plans from Scarif to the rebels, too.
They found the Death Star plans. They have to transmit them from the communications tower. You have to take down the shield gate.
Call up a Hammerhead Corvette. I have an idea.
Admiral Raddus was superior in every way to Admiral Akbar as a military leader. Maybe it wasn't quite as memeable. And then the events of the entire Battle of Scarif made logical sense, despite the number of viewpoints we're given here. The sequence of events was pretty complex actually, with even more viewpoints to sift through than even the Battle of Naboo at the end of The Phantom Menace. Remember that mess? Despite the complexity, somehow the Battle of Scarif was completely understandable to the audience. It really helped that the communication between the characters was crystal clear, because otherwise the entire plot would have fallen apart here. This is also where the ancillary characters come in, by the way, and functioned as glue between the major pieces of the final plot. Melshi, Blue Wing Commander, Space Traffic Control, the Imperial officers, and Admiral Radis, while they all had small parts in this movie, were sufficiently set up as competent factors in this battle, and served to move along the plot, where it would have been unrealistic for the main characters to do so. This is absolutely where the Battle of Naboo failed. There was no other starfighter pilot defined other than Anakin in the space battle. No one else besides Jar Jar Binks was characterized in the battle between the Gungans and the droid army. Nobody but Queen Amidala and her security chief even said a word during their siege of the capital city. And there was absolutely no dialogue between the two Jedi and Darth Maul. This is also one of the weak points of the Battle of Endor, by the way. In the Battle of Yavin, there were so many small characters that people resonated with, from Porkins to Wedge to Red Leader and Gold Leader, and Biggs. I mean, sure, we saw Wedge in the Battle of Endor, but there was no other pilot in the space battle you could count as memorable. Certainly not this guy. To make matters worse, for the Battle of Naboo, each part in the battle was mutually exclusive to everything else. Nothing that happens in the space battle, for instance, had the slightest bearing on the progress made by Queen Amidala. Queen Amidala had absolutely nothing to do with the Gungan battle with the droids. I mean, could you tell me what tactical effect the Jedi had in the overall battle? I can't. Admiral Radis sent his Blue Wing starfighters to support the force on the ground though, and his major goal was to take down the shield gate so he could re-establish communications with them. And the major factions on the ground affected the battle by communicating with each other, defining the objectives and the tactics. Then the ground team was able to communicate with the Space Force to relay the need for the Space Force to punch a hole through the shield gate. So the Battle of Scarif was a cohesive effort to accomplish one goal, whereas Naboo was 4 separate events with absolutely no relation to each other. As cherry on top here, every single character in the Battle of Scarif sold their roles, from the main ones right down to the guys with just seconds of screen time.
Forward! Forward! Keep drawing them out! Sir, those are rebel ships. Get Admiral Gordon immediately. Stay with me. Come on!
I mean, they realistically channeled the adrenaline of being in a battle, fighting for their very lives while trying to complete their objectives. I guess you could say the entire package of the Battle of Scarif seemed complete here, and it made for an excellent grand finale of the movie. And it passed off the baton to A New Hope with the players mostly intact and the plot set up without any major inconsistencies with that movie. And when Princess Leia tells Obi-Wan in A New Hope,
"This is our most desperate hour. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope."
you actually believe her now because we see the results played out from the events before. You could say some of the same things for the entire movie, actually. Despite some of the shortcomings of the characters, everyone seemed to care about this movie and understand Star Wars enough to make something that was actually believable inside that universe. The old stuff was recreated faithfully, and the new stuff reinforced the Star Wars universe rather than break it. The characters were pretty good for the most part, and the plot made sense. And attention to detail here was above everything else made beyond the original trilogy. So this is why I place Rogue One as the film, the only film outside the original trilogy that's actually canon. So that's it. That's my video. Hey, if you like the music in the background, head on over to my main channel, TechnoX royalty-free music. There's a lot of great tracks there in a lot of different genres. You'll love the music there, and you can use all of it in your videos too. It's covered under CC 4.0. That's Creative Commons 4.0. TechnoX royalty-free music. I'll see you next time.